Morning, everybody. So, I want to talk about truck stop parking tips and what I look for when I'm parking my truck. Try to avoid it from getting hit, or just trying to be safe in general. Uh, typically, I don't typically like to park at the major truck stops like Pilot, Flying J, TA, or Petro. I do like Love's, only because Love's seems to have larger room to operate. You know, it's not uncommon for Love's to give you that extra room that you can line up and back in straight into your parking spot. But you know, even some Love's can be small, and you know, occasionally I will avoid the Love's. Pilot and Flying J, kind of cramped. You know, it's just too many. I think rookies. The rookies are always attracted to the major truck stops. You know, the rookies will always go to the Love's, Pilot, Flying J, TA, and Petro. They always will. But I prefer the smaller independent truck stops that are often like a gravel lot. There's no lines on for parking spot. And when you park next to another truck, you can create that 2 feet or maybe 3 feet gap between your truck and another truck. And when you do that, that makes it safer for everybody, because you know, drivers come and go throughout the night, and you know, they can pull out safely without ripping off your front bumper of your truck. You get into one of these popular chain truck stops, and you got a high volume of trucks coming and going, and as a result, you got different people at different skill levels, and you know, they sometimes back into you while they're trying to back up, or they rip off your front bumper when they go to leave. They don't get out and look. You know, that's the big thing. I always get out and look. I know it's cliche, but after 10 years of driving, it doesn't hurt to jump out of the truck 5, 6, 7 times, however many times it takes, to make sure you don't hit another truck. Because the insurance is going to be awful to deal with. You're better off getting out of your truck and looking a dozen times if necessary than dealing one time with the insurance company. Insurance companies are just complete a-holes. You don't want to deal with them if you don't have to. So you definitely want to take that extra precaution. And I would recommend, if you haven't already, start using strategy when you're parking. Recognize that the most dangerous places to park are the big brand truck stops. Those are very dangerous, compared to an independent truck stop that may be smaller, you know, may only have 10 places to park, but you can park very safely and not have to worry about your truck getting hit. You know, if you want to get your shower at Love's or Pilot, Flying J, or TA, Petro, do it during the daytime, you know, like halfway through your workday. You know, you've been on the road for 4 or 5 hours, stop, take an hour break, go grab your shower. You know, that would be fine. And then you can park anywhere after that. You know, it's like you're going to finish your day, maybe you'll park in a small independent truck stop, or maybe you'll park in a rest area. Now, I do often park in rest areas if you get there early enough. Sometimes you don't get there early enough, and if you get there early enough, you could probably find a good spot. But I avoid rest areas in certain part of the country because DOT likes to do truck inspections in the morning. You know, so Pennsylvania, New York, any of the New England states, even Ohio, I've seen an increased uptick in highway patrol and inspections at the rest areas. New York is really, really bad. You know, I avoid rest areas altogether in the state of New York, because every time you pull in, you know, typically there's a way station and a rest area, and there's DOT right there. It's like, you know, they love it, you know, because they have a steady stream of trucks coming in, take a break, and you know, they want to inspect your truck while you're there. I've had times when I stopped in Ohio at a rest area, wake up in the morning, DOT is inspecting trucks. And it's like, oh, that's not a good way to start your morning. Now, it used to be, they used to wake you up, but now they passed new rules that says that they can't interrupt your 10-hour break to do a DOT inspection. Which makes sense because you have to go on duty to do a DOT inspection. If you're on a 10-hour break, you know, that's going to violate your hours of service. You got to go on duty for an inspection. So, you know, you have to use strategy when you're parking. And if you're going to park in the New England area or Pennsylvania, anywhere on the eastern seaboard, you better find a spot early. Start your day early as you can, 5 a.m., and then finish early, and you probably have a good opportunity to find a spot. Same thing in California. You know, you got to start early in order to finish early and get a good spot. You know, if you have to pay for parking in some of these areas, use it strategically. You know, it's like, if it's $10 to park overnight, but you can drive an extra 20, 30 miles, that would pay for the parking. You know, it's like, well, I don't like having to pay for parking, but if I could get in an extra 20 miles, that kind of lessens the impact of having to pay for paid parking. Let's see what else. The big thing about parking at any truck stop, never park your truck on the end of the row. Don't ever do that, even if it's like the only spot available. High number of accidents when you park your truck on the end. And the reason is because the rookies aren't paying attention, and they don't swing their truck wide enough, and their trailer will catch the front of your tractor. Or the parking is so jammed, there's so much parking where it says no parking, but trucks are parking, you know, in the fire lane, you know, in the turn lane. You know, they're parking everywhere. So here you thought you were perfectly safe because you're in the guidelines of the parking spot, but then some idiot parked somewhat illegally, you know, nearby, and then other trucks are having to squeeze through, and guess what? You're parked on the end, you're going to get hit, and they're not going to stop. You know, you're sound asleep, your truck gets hit. By the time you wake up, put your shoes on, go outside and check what the damage is, that guy's long gone. You know, if he's real heavy, he may not even have felt it. You know, I've seen that before where guys have no idea that they hit another truck because, you know, the weight of their load, and it, you know, your truck has got a plastic front end. Unless they hit the frame, they're not going to feel any kind of tug on the trailer. And even if they did feel a tug, they may just chalk it up to a pothole, you know, so odds are they're not going to stop. So you parked on the end of the road because that was a vacant spot. You went to bed. Meanwhile, other drivers are parking incorrectly near you, causing a bottleneck. And then here comes the one driver you're most feared of. Could be Swift, could be anybody, and they can't squeeze their trailer through without hitting your truck, and then they don't stop. You wake up and the front of your truck is torn off, and you're like, how did that happen? You know, now you gotta go back to your videos, try to find a video, try to identify which company it was, what their tractor number was, call your company safety department, you know, try to find a police report. You're going to spend half a day screwing around dealing with that accident when, if you use strategy, park somewhere else where it's less likely to happen. You know, you gotta play the risk. You know, it's like, which has more risk? Parking at a Pilot Flying J where parking is tight, or parking at a independent truck stop that you can create 2 or 3 feet of space between you and the trucks nearby. So that's what I think about. When I park, I think about risk. You know, I don't park at a way station. I know a lot of guys do. But again, that belongs to the DOT. You know, so, you know, here you did your 10-hour break at the way station, you wake up in the morning and guess what? DOT showed up for work and they just randomly selected your truck for inspection. So you kind of asked for it in that regards. Now, if you're really confident, like you just got your truck out of the shop, just had an inspection done, and you're 100% confident your truck can pass inspection, then, you know, maybe you see that as a low risk. But even if I did get inspected, then you would pass it without any problems. You know, so then you're like, well, I can't find a place to park, but the way station allows overnight parking, and I'm pretty confident my truck can pass inspection without any problems. So go ahead and park there if you have to. Wouldn't be my first choice. I do use personal conveyance on occasion when I can't find a place to park. You know, I've gone upwards of 2 hours from one truck stop to another truck stop to another truck stop looking for a place to park. It's tough. It's real tough. You know, and like, I really don't want to have to go on personal conveyance, but I'm not willing to sacrifice, you know, the safety of the truck by parking it incorrectly or illegally, or in a spot that I think has a high likelihood of getting hit. You know, there may be one spot at a TA or Petro, and you're on personal conveyance, and you look at that spot, and you're like, yeah, technically, I could squeeze it in there, but I've been driving for 8 hours, and I'm pretty tired, and it's like, I would really have to shoehorn it in order to get it in that spot, and it's like, you know, it's not worth the risk. You know, my concentration after driving 500 miles, it's not as good as it was when I started today, and I'm not going to try to put my truck into this nearly impossible parking spot. Even though it's open for a reason, because it's high difficulty in getting it in. Is it possible? Yeah, it's possible, but kind of risky, you know, so I often avoid those. You know, I was like, I realize I'm on personal conveyance, but I'm not going to risk trying to shoehorn that, you know, in there late at night when it's nearly impossible to get it in there to begin with. I'll look for a better spot. Now, if you get to a truck stop early enough, you can get the best spot. You know, it's like you can get any spot you want. I try, you know, if I'm going to leave early in the morning, I don't want any trucks blocking me from getting out. So, you know, you're like at the end of the row, and there's a cornfield at the end of the row. That sounds like a safe spot, but again, other trucks are going to come in through the night, and they're going to park incorrectly, and they're going to block you from getting out. You know, what you want is the second or third spot from the end. That way, if there's another truck that comes in during the night and they decide to park along the berm and they're blocking the truck on the end from getting out, well, you're not on the end. You know, you're lined up perfectly to drive right, you know, the center of the drive-through. You know, you're like, no matter who comes in, I can get out. You know, because the way you parked, you know, you're thinking, okay, what if you like do these what if scenarios? What if a rookie decides to park along the the fire lane, and he blocks the trucks on the end from getting out. You know, it's like, well, I'm not going to park on the end. I'm going to park 2 or 3 spots from the end. And I'm going to be right in the middle, perfectly lined up so I can get out without any problem. Even if it's like 2 a.m. in the morning, you're going to be able to get out. Now, a lot of times, those spots, the flatbed drivers like, because the flatbed can't angle their trailer as much as a dry van. And you'll often see a flatbed who would prefer those spots be used for a flatbed, you know, because now they can line up straight and get out easy. But if you're there early enough, you can get the spot. Now, you don't have to be overly nice or overly generous and say, well, I'm going to save that for a flatbed. You know, don't do that. I mean, they'll find a spot. And you got to look out for your own safety and your own interest. You know, you got to think, what's the best place to park? I'm not going to get hit and I can get out easily. You know, so I think about that. You know, a lot of times the rookies will all park towards the front. You know, they don't want to walk the extra 20, 30 feet from the back row to go into the store. You know, they kind of get a little lazy about that. You know, everybody wants to park in as close to the store as possible. And so you'll often find good parking spots in the back row. You know, and that's pretty good. Now I'm also looking at who I'm parking next to. So if I'm driving dry van, I really don't want to park next to a reefer. I really don't want to park between 2 reefers. It's just too loud, you know, or somebody with an APU, you know. They got their APU running. Guess what? That lines up almost exactly where your head is, you know. So you're going to be listening to that APU all day and all night. What you really want to do if you're driving dry van is park next to another dry van. You know, so a lot of times I choose my parking spot based on the other trucks that are you know, next to the parking spot. You know, if I see that it's a reefer, that's not my first choice. You know, I might park there, but you know, that wouldn't be my first choice. And then you got to look at the companies and who the companies are. You know, it's like, if it's another big box carrier, you're probably going to be okay. They're more safety conscious than, say, an independent owner operator on the spot market. You know, if the truck is real raggedy, you know, it's like, look at that truck. It's all beat up, you know, looks like hell. Do you really want to park next to that guy? I don't, you know, because they don't take care of their own equipment. They don't care about your equipment, you know. So if you could park next to a nice, clean, shiny truck, you know, a new truck, you know, you think that owner is just as concerned about their own truck safety as you are, then that's probably your best bet. You know, it's like, choose your neighbors. You know, do you want to live next to you know, a junky old truck, or do you want to live next to a bright, shiny new truck? You know, that's something I look at. You know, I look at, if I park next to a flatbed, it may be a wide load or slightly a wide load, and I have to think about how much room he's going to need to get out. What if he leaves before I do? Is he going to be able to get out safely, or is he going to hit the front end of my truck? You know, so if I look at the load of the flatbed and I'm like, I don't know, I think he's going to need extra room to get out, then I won't park next to him. You know, it's a little bit like common sense, but you got to think about your truck, if it's going to be safe while you're sleeping. You know, are other drivers going to be able to easily get in and out without hitting you? You know, things like this. So, you know, other things, I don't typically park next to flatbeds that have like a tarp, a tarp that kind of looks like a box van. You know, a tarp that goes up all the way up to the sides, and maybe it's a grain truck, maybe it's some kind of specialty freight where they have tarps over like rails. They have this rack system that their tarp fits over. What happens is if you make a mistake backing up next to a truck that's tarped, I'm not talking about a flatbed tarp, I'm talking about other types of tarps. If you even touch, just bump that trailer, you're going to tear that tarp. You tear that tarp, now the other driver's going to be really upset, and your company's going to have to pay for a new tarp. So a lot of times even though the space is open, I see that tarp and I'm like, I'm not parking next to that guy. Even if you don't hit him, he could always say that you did, and try to get a new tarp out of you. So it's sort of like you're driving for a big box carrier, he's a small company, and he has a raggedy old tarp. He would like to have a new tarp. So he may falsely claim that you backed into his trailer even though you didn't, so that he can get a new tarp. So I typically avoid those types of trucks that have those types of tarps. Regular flatbed with a tarp is okay. It's the other types of loads that use tarps. So as you can see, truck parking is not a simple issue. It's probably one of the most dangerous aspects of the job is finding a safe place to park. You think the most dangerous part of the job is driving on the road. No, actually the most dangerous part of your job is truck stop accidents. Happens all the time. Accidents at the truck stop or accidents at the customer. Now sometimes customers have overnight parking. And you really got to think twice about that. It's okay if they have good security, but I typically like to use the buddy system. I don't like to park at customers if I'm the only truck there. That kind of makes you an easy target for criminal activity. It's like you're there all by yourself all night, and anybody with bad intentions is going to realize that you're in that truck and you're all by yourself. Now if there's another truck nearby, then that's perfectly safe. The odds are they're not going to bother you if there's another truck parked next to you. So you really got to think about overnight parking at customers. And it depends on what part of the country you're in. If you're in Nebraska and they have overnight parking, that's pretty safe. If you're in St. Louis and they have overnight parking, you probably could do it as long as there's other trucks there. But if you're by yourself, I probably wouldn't park by myself in St. Louis. Just a high crime area, a lot of problems. You got to remember, the country allowed in millions and millions and millions of illegal immigrants that weren't vetted. You have no idea who these people are. They're desperate for cash, and they would think nothing of breaking into your truck, whether you're in it or not. So the roads aren't as safe as they used to be. So you got to think about parking as an integral part of your job, whether you're a company driver or an owner-operator. I'll tell you another thing with owner-operator trucks. They typically have grill guards on the front of them, which is fine. And I often park next to other trucks that also have grill guards because they know they have to take extra precaution because their truck is just a little bit longer. Because they don't want their grill guard torn off any more than you do. So you have to think about how your grill guard is going to affect other drivers' ability to pull out safely. So you don't want to wedge your truck in a tight spot. You got a grill guard on there, and the odds are they can't pull out without hitting your grill guard. So you have to think about that when you're parking. So I'll wrap this up and say, there's a lot of strategy into something that seems fairly simple. Truck parking. Very simple, but but the risk is very high, you know, and you have to take extra precautions and think strategically. How can you avoid getting hit? All right, guys, that's all I got for you. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the internet.